Many, many, many years ago, Andy introduced me to his class, and it was the first of many participation government classes that I've attended over the years that I've been in service in the State Assembly, and it's always a great pleasure, and I try not to forget to tell every teacher who has a participation government class that the reason that I'm there is because Andy taught me how to do it. So Andy, it's great to see you again, and thank you for your continued civic involvement. I can't see you. I see bright lights right here, so that's okay. So if I don't make eye contact, please forgive me. The issue of school funding is one that has perplexed not just school boards year after year, but has been a troubling topic in Albany as well, in bad times especially, but also in good times. We don't seem to be able to get our arms around what we can do to adequately fund education, not just for the near term, but with a long view, with a view toward the future. What are we going to do to sustain our capital needs? What are we going to do to make sure that every child, no matter where they live in New York State, has a fair chance for an education, has an equal chance for a good education? What are we going to do to break down the inequalities that exist between the kid from Scarsdale, who's getting a $40,000 a year education, and the kid from Saugerties, who's getting a $16,000 a year education? And what are we going to do to make sure that the value is there for each one of those students, no matter what school district they go to? These are issues that have evaded solution in Albany. Unfortunately, too many of my colleagues and too many of the people who occupy the executive office in the state of New York have not given it enough focus, enough attention, so that we can resolve this issue once and for all. Andy alluded to the statistics of the 1970s, maybe before, but I remember what I would call the glory days of school funding in the 1970s, when about 25% on average in New York State was financed by local taxpayers. And about 75% or more, in fact, in some of those years it was as high as 82% was financed through other sources. 16% federal funding. That dropped as low as 4%, it's back up around 8%, but it's not as distributed in the same way that it was before. State aid, on average, someplace in the 40s, on average across the state. You heard Andy's statistics for this district, it's about 35%. In some districts there's a little more, in some districts there's a little less. But it's about 40%. Used to be in the 60s. Used to be at one point almost 70% of the cost of education. When was that? That was at a time when New York State had a truly progressive income tax. Our income tax rate was more than double what it is today, even with the changes that were made 2 weeks ago to the tax code. If we don't charge those kinds of taxes at the state level, we will not be able to afford to pay those kinds of percentages of local education costs. Right now, my good friend Frank Morrow, who works for the Fiscal Policy Institute, has crunched a lot of numbers, and we called him today to get the most up-to-date numbers in view of the new changes to the tax code. And for those of you who might not be aware of it, what the legislature and the governor did last week or 2 weeks ago was restore a slight bit of progressivity to the tax code. The millionaire's tax that was eliminated from the budget last year in April, the same time that a property tax cap was imposed on the school districts, resulting in a diminishment of aid, a reduction of aid to school districts, here a significant amount of money in the millions. That tax was partially restored. So we asked Frank today, what would it cost to finance a basic quality education in New York State under the Foundation Aid program over and above what we spend today? And he estimated that we would need about $17.5 billion more than we are generating right now, which, if you do absolutely nothing else, take away STAR, because you don't need STAR if you're not charging property taxes anymore, bring it down to about $14 billion, and then levy that across the board. Each one of our income taxes in New York State would have to go up by 38%. Now, that sounds like an awful lot. And for many of us, it would be an awful lot, more than we're paying in property taxes right now in some instances, but in most instances, no. Nor is it the appropriate solution. The appropriate solution is to go back to a graduated income tax, go back to an income tax that is progressive and understands that those who have benefited the most from the wealth of New York ought to be asked to pay more than those who are benefiting the least, than those who are not getting what they should be getting. Thank you for that, but it wasn't just an applause line. It's real math. If you're making a lot of money because of New York State, because you live here, because you work here, because you extract wealth here, you're doing it because of the hard work of the rest of us. You're doing it because we are spending our money training a workforce that's going to be able to make money for somebody else. That's who makes the millions in this state. Not somebody who goes out there and plows a field, not somebody who goes out there and sells hardware, not somebody who goes out there and makes something, somebody who makes money off of somebody else's labor and hard work and thinking. So let's think about going a step further than the governor went. But let's give him credit for starting the trend. But let's talk about going a step further, restoring true progressivity to our income tax code so that we can once again afford a quality education for every child in New York State. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to be without pain for many people. And it's not going to be free. Nobody has a free solution to this problem. But it's one solution I think we can achieve. Now, should we raise income taxes by 38% if you're a family of 4 and you're making about $100,000 a year right now between your combined incomes, and your taxes right now are about $6,000? Should those taxes go to $9,000? I don't think so. I think in addition to adding progressivity to the tax code so that the working people would have less pay and people who are benefiting more pay a little bit more, the other thing we have to do is we have to come up with a sustainable plan to seriously economize the way we deliver education. Seriously economize the way we deliver education. A word that scares many of us, particularly if you're in one of the districts that's represented here today, is the word consolidation. But consolidation doesn't have to be a bad word. You know, it's just a thing. It's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's a bad thing if it's done wrong. It's a good thing if it's done right. There's so many things we could be consolidating here in Ulster County. We have 9 boards of education. We have 9 special ed departments. We have 9 transportation departments. We have 9 back offices. We have 9 this, 9 that, 9 the other thing, and what we don't have is the economies of scale that allow us to provide that excellent education to every single child, those opportunities that every single child deserves, because we're so spread out. We're seeing schools close, not because it makes sense to close those schools, but because they happen to be in a district that was drawn around the same time I was born. How long ago was that? That's a long, long time ago. Let's take a look at those district lines and let's see what we can do to make them make better sense. Let's take good, solid school buildings and make maximum use of them, not minimum use of them. Let's not board them up, close them down, and send them into ruin and ruin entire communities. Take it from me. I grew up on Broome Avenue in Kingston. How many people know where Broome Avenue in Kingston is? How many people know where number 6 school used to be on Broome Avenue in Kingston? Well, they tore number 6 school. They closed it down around 30 years ago. They tore it down about 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And the neighborhood, from the day the doors were shuttered there, has been in decline. How many people know where the West Hurley Elementary School is? Take a look at the communities around the West Hurley Elementary School. They're holding their own, but they're not as vital, not as strong as they used to be, because that school closed. Let's not kid ourselves. Every single one of these decisions has incredible implications, not just educationally, but socially as well, economically as well. So let's, before we make these decisions, before we take the plunge, let's see if there's a better way. And I think there is. I think there's a better way by going through issue by issue, function by function, and looking for ways that we can consolidate services amongst our schools, economize on a grand scale. And what can we do in the course of doing so? We can provide a better special education for our children. We can provide a more enriched education for children who have special abilities. We can do that. We can do it here in Ulster County. We can set the stage. Now, we have to do it. We have to do it because you and I can no longer afford to pay the property taxes that it will take to sustain this education, the educational costs as they are today. So before we throw in the towel, let's try to come up with some creative solutions. Now, this doesn't start on its own. It doesn't start in some office in Albany, particularly in the legislature or the governor's office. It starts in rooms like this, where people come out and they want to vent, they want to express their fears, they want to show their solidarity with their community. That's how they come in, and when they go out, let's hope they leave with a plan of action. And that plan of action is to start taking matters into our own hands and really making it happen. Let's get my colleagues in Albany, and I've been all over the state with this same pitch. Let's get my colleagues in Albany to sign on to the 21st Century Schools Act that will allow a rational approach toward reduction in the number of services that are provided by education in a way that's rational, that won't reduce the quality of education. Let's get my colleagues on board to recognize the common sense approach of equity in education so that a kid in Buffalo and a kid in Brooklyn and a kid in Rondout Valley and a kid in Plattsburgh all have the same chance for a quality education. That's our charge. Our charge doesn't end in our district lines. It doesn't end in our school PTA meeting. It is for every child in this state. And my colleagues have to be made to know that. And the governor of the state has to be made to know that. And the Board of Regents of the state has to be made to know that. And the Commissioner of Education has to be made to know that. And your neighbors, in particular, have to be made to know that. Your neighbors who have children in school, your neighbors who don't, your neighbors who teach, and your neighbors who haven't been near the school in 20 years. We all have to understand that this is part of the very basic fabric of our society, and it's in danger, and it needs our help. There's an emergency. You're here to help us on that emergency on one of the busiest weeks you have in the year. I want to thank you for coming out tonight. I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussion, and we're in good hands with Andy. Thank you very much.